Welcome to The Art of Growth, where we use the Enneagram and the best tools we can find for transformation. And today, we are talking to my friend Jenae Spencer, who is a therapist who specializes in biofeedback and is really tuned into a lot of the ways that we can reset the body. I've known Jenae for a long time, but recently she posted something about resetting the nervous system and how it's all about the nervous system. And I was like, we really need to talk to her about this because we talk about the integration of the head, heart, and the body and how so often if you actually want to reset your system, you actually need to start with the body. And this is someone who's done a lot of work in this area and continues to work in this area. So we wanted to talk to her today. Before we get into that, the hub of all of our work is theartofgrowth.org. You can go there and take a free Enneagram test, take a free instincts test, and we even have a youth Enneagram test on there, as well as you can reach out to us for coaching or anything else on there. You can also join the community there, which is a group of people who are listeners who have come together to talk about their own growth process using the Enneagram and a calendar tool that we talk about going through all of the seasons. So all of that is at theartofgrowth.org. We are about to release an entire season of panels about Enneagram stances and attachment styles. And so we're going to be on a break for a couple weeks until we launch that. And then we are going to drop the entire season at once so that people can really binge and learn a lot about the stances, how to impacts with type and instinct, and all of that coming together as we follow this thread of who we are, this instincts into our type, into our cultural overlays, into our context, and into our attachment styles and our stances, which is how we communicate. So that is coming soon. It has been an incredible learning experience. So make sure you're subscribed so you get that when it does drop. But for now, let's jump into today's conversation with Jenae. Well, we are here today with Jenae Spencer, and Jenae is a really longtime friend of my wife's, and I wanted to invite her on specifically because she's someone who I think is really in tune with helping people tune into the body, which is something that often gets neglected. I feel like there's been a growing awareness that we have to be, tuned into what's going on in our minds and what's going on in our heads. And I've heard of a lot more awareness, like tuning into emotions and things like this, but the body to me is like the frontier of where a lot of learning is happening right now. And Jenae, you work as a therapist, you are a therapist, but you also work in this world of biofeedback. One of the things that made me say we got to have Jenae on the podcast was a post you made about the nervous system and how it's all about the nervous system. And, you are a yoga teacher. So you are really tuned into a lot of the things that impact the body. And you are a body type on the Enneagram. And so we're like, this is someone I think is really good to talk to about this series we've been in about context matters, how the setting that you're in impacts you. So experiences you've had impact you, and they impact you on every level. And I think a lot of people aren't aware of the way those things have impacted their bodies specifically. And yet when I worked with coaching clients, and I do this with a whole week in group coaching, where it's all about tuning into the body. Like if you're going to reset your three centers, your head, heart, body, a lot of times it actually needs to start in the body. And so this is a fascinating thing that I'm wanting to learn more about. And so just explain a little bit about your work, why you're doing it, and even like how you ended up in the Boston area, since that was part of that story.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, one, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
So I would have to say when I went to grad school, that's a long time now, about 15 years ago, most of the training was around cognition, CBT, things like that. And all of that, amazing tools. I loved grad school and all of that. But I remember even back then having this sense that there was more to it, in the healing process. Mm-hmm. And so, years go by, I'm doing my residency, all these types of things. And I actually started seeking out more holistic mind-body things for myself. I started going to yoga, looking at my diet in different ways. All of that was never something I even thought about before. And as I started doing that in my personal life, it just was like, holy crap, this is much bigger. I want to bring this into what I'm doing, into the therapy session. And so that just took me down a rabbit hole of just digging into this. I became a yoga teacher. I got trained specifically with trauma-sensitive yoga. I started looking at all the ways that trauma impacts the body and ways that I can incorporate that into the therapy process. That got me into biofeedback, looking at how the nervous system is functioning. And here we are today. I tell all my clients, I want to look at things as holistically as possible so we can really address what's going on at every level.
And a lot of people are familiar with talk therapy. They're familiar with the cognitive part of it. But what is biofeedback? Because I think a lot of people may not even know what that is.
Yeah. Okay. So I right now specifically focus in on peripheral nervous system biofeedback. You want me to give like a big picture maybe of nervous system? So if we look at our whole nervous system, we have two main parts. We have the central nervous system, which is more brainstem. And then the peripheral nervous system is everything else in the body. The two main parts of that are the somatic, which is more responsible for muscles, movement, and the autonomic nervous system. This is where I hone in. The autonomic nervous system, they originally named it that because they saw all the functions in the autonomic nervous system as automatic. Our heart beats, we digest, we breathe without us doing anything to make it happen.
Right.
However, what we see now is that we can have a lot of influence over the nervous system and the patterns that are built in there. So I look at the functioning of the autonomic nervous system. Stored within the autonomic nervous system are the two main parts, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, which I'm guessing most people have at least heard of. The sympathetic is more responsible for the high energy, the fight or flight response, the stress response, versus the parasympathetic is the rest and digest, bringing the body back down to recovery. Yeah. And so what I look at is, how is a person's nervous system functioning? When they're facing stressors, how is their body responding? Is their body able to fully recover and come back down? And how is that impacting how they feel physically, emotionally, and mentally?
Yes. Oh, man.
Yeah. Well, there's so many ways to take this, right? So that's like part of it is like, which angle?
So when it comes to like regulating the nervous system, give us the basics of this, because I know this is something that I think I first experienced in a yoga class, was almost this feeling of, oh, I've come down, because I tend to buzz at a pretty high level. And feeling like my whole system's settling when they had us breathe in a certain way and move in a certain way. And I think it was like it was like a DVD that somebody lent me. And then I experienced it later in a class that really sticks out to me, a very clear memory. But I was like, I'm not sure I've felt this before. Or I remember feeling this a couple times, like stumbling onto it as a kid, where I would change my breathing and rest, and I would feel my whole system settle. And I was like, oh, that feels really good. Yeah. So like, what are some of those introductory things as far as actually settling your system?
Yeah. So with yoga specifically, I always talk about how yoga in itself is not magical, right?
Right.
But the elements that it has in it are very calming for the nervous system. So with our breath, when we inhale, the brake of the parasympathetic comes off. So like it allows the heart rate to go up and all of these different things. When we exhale, it puts the brake on the parasympathetic, the relaxation response. And so the heart rate goes down. So just starting to slow our breath, taking a gentle inhale and lengthening the exhale begins to bring the body back down. And that's one of the many elements of yoga. Even things like in yoga where we're focused on releasing muscles, softening, letting go. Well, when we do that, we're sending signals to the brain of, hey, we're safe. We're okay right now. We don't have to be stressed and on high alert, which so often happens when we're stress response. You know, if a dog's running towards me, what am I going to do? I'm immediately going to tense up, decide what I need to do with this, right? So just relaxing there brings a calm to the body.
For a lot of people that are listening to this, some of them are going to go, whatever, because it's not natural for some people to think about the body having a conversation, let's say, with your head. So some of us think that, no, context doesn't do anything, doesn't affect me. I can show up anywhere. And it's just I have to control my thoughts in order to then control the way I physically feel. Mm-hmm. And you're suggesting something quite different than that, is that there's a conversation. And I think a lot of that has been out there and people have been reading about it. But I still think it's something that is difficult for some people to conceive of, is that there's sort of seems like there's a conversation between those two. Yeah.
Yeah.
To me, it's not mental health, physical health. Like, it is just health.
It's just health.
It is all so interconnected in there.
Yeah.
You can't separate it out.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's back up to maybe a little bit of a larger picture. Is we're in a kind of a unique situation with stress being at a significant level, right? So I was reading, and I think it was Sapiens, the book Sapiens, I believe. The other was saying something like, back in the hunter-gatherer days, yes, people had stress, of course. But it was generally like you're being chased by something or you're trying to find food. Yeah. And then you would return to that parasympathetic state. Am I saying it right? Okay. So then you would a balanced state. So then you return to that. Today, we don't do that. We're in a chronic state of stress.
Yeah.
And so maybe talk about that and talk about, like, what does that do to us?
Well, okay. So if we look at the picture of what's going on in the body, our body was created, one, to learn patterns, two, to protect us and keep us safe, which is kind of what you're talking about there, right? So every experience that we have, our brain takes in, remembers, and uses it to essentially say, we want to keep you safe. We're going to do anything we need to do that. Specifically, the amygdala is responsible for our emotional responses. So if I get bit by a dog, let's say, I have a pretty traumatic experience, my amygdala is remembering that through all of my senses, what I see, what I hear, what I taste, all of that in the moment. If 2 weeks later I'm walking down the street and from the distance, behind a fence, I hear a dog bark, my amygdala might go, whoo, we heard that. That was unsafe before. We got to do something. My heart rate goes up. I get sweaty. This is how, PTSD works, things like that. Essentially, my body's trying to keep me safe, but it's not responding appropriately in the current setting.
Yeah. So we're no longer dealing with just prefrontal cortex, sort of like higher level thinking at this point. We're dealing with something that functions more instantaneously. And so if that's the case, then the process of actually dealing with that would not be through more thought.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, buddy.
But through something else.
Yeah.
And so you would be addressing much more of what's happening in the body and the emotions associated with it than say trying to outthink that. Or even I have people come in. Because we do a lot with biofeedback, there's a lot of evidence around looking at more like chronic pain, chronic conditions in the body, because these patterns, whether through chronic anxiety, stress, trauma, my autonomic nervous system has learned to function in a more maladaptive way for me. It's going to have an impact. All of a sudden, one of the things, if I'm more sympathetic, like that dog running towards me about to bite me, one of the things that happens is our digestion becomes inhibited. Yeah. Because it's not important to digest my breakfast that morning. I need to survive. Yeah. My body needs to give all that energy to that. Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
But when the parasympathetic comes back in, it begins to stimulate it again. But what if all of a sudden I'm living more in the sympathetic? I'm living more hypervigilant. All of a sudden, IBS, ulcers, things like that. So chronic headaches, TMJ, when people are clenching. I mean, there's just so many things that kind of get off in the body. And of course, all that affects us emotionally and mentally as well.
Yeah, sure. That's the thing, is that the anxiety that happens, the tension that builds up in the body, and then you start feeling like bummed or stuck or, even depressed and, like that, because now I'm stuck. And so every single thing feels off. And it's like, well, how do I even start to get back? Yeah. I just think through some of the hardest times of my life, it's like the whole body just felt like an annoyance to me. And it is, like you're saying, it's one thing. And this is something we always come back to, is this integration of the head, heart, and body, the physical, the emotional, and the mental. But the problem is when the whole system feels off because it's lived under such tension and stress. Yeah. And like when it comes to the context, like sometimes we can't get ourselves out of a context of stress. So we need to do something in the middle of that to be able to, rest ourselves. I just heard a story about a rock climber talking about tunnel vision, how she was stuck and feeling like she was about to fall and just couldn't see another hold. And like the belayer down below was like, it's literally right in front of you, and couldn't see what was right in front of her. She's like, oh, I can, and then everything's fine. But because the anxiety had just built up, couldn't actually do the simplest task that was most obvious. Yeah.
Well, if you think about it, again, our bodies and brains were built for safety. So in that moment, if something is incredibly unsafe, what are we going to do? We're going to hone in on that one thing, and we can't see anything else. Right. Because it's trying to protect us, right?
Yeah, it's like because you're clamped on the hold you have, you can't find the hold you need. Yeah. Yeah. Like it was like, that just felt like a metaphor to me. I was like, I've been in that spot where I'm so clamped on to the thing I have that I can't actually see that the thing I need is, just move this way. Yeah. Just make this adjustment.
Yeah. We've talked a little bit about context matters in the last month or two. And I had this conversation with someone about when is it running from your context versus when is it like discerned you need to change your context, you need to make some changes there. And it led us to being able to narrow down, for now anyways, we're still learning about it, but that your context should, as best as you can make it, support and develop where you want to go, your values, your purposes, that sort of thing. So sometimes you have to make changes in your context, meaning like, who am I hanging out with? Or, what time I'm going to bed at, or, even where I live. Those things impact us and can impact us at a physical level as well. Mm-hmm. So I was thinking about, as you're saying that the context does impact us, but there's this sort of conversation between the context and ourselves and what's happening in that. And so sometimes people feel like, well, I need to change my context right now because it's just stressful to me, right? Yeah. So we leave and we go somewhere else, but we bring that same problem that we're carrying with us somewhere else. And so in your work, you're trying to get people to focus much more on what is your experience of that and what are the messages that you've maybe have heard of before, maybe experiences like being bit by a dog and then now seeing all dogs as a problem and you can't hang out with any dog because of that. Yeah.
That happens a lot in relationships, right? Like if I find myself getting in the same pattern with the same person or things like that, it's like, oh, maybe it's just getting a completely different person, different type. Or maybe there's something in me that needs to shift where I'm creating the same pattern over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you distinguish that? I think begin to, because I have seen this a lot of times. People get stuck and it's like, well, you need to get out of that context. And other thing is like, no, you're the issue in this context. So like, how do you even begin to like navigate that?
Yeah. That's funny. I had someone say to me this week, I was explaining a little bit of the full stress profile that we do for biofeedback, which I'll talk us through in a minute. But what they said to me was, shouldn't everyone do this? And I was like, yes, yes, everyone should do this, because then if we're healing, if we're getting in touch with our body, it's going to be so much more clear then what context is really working for us and what actually isn't,
That's really good.
So this is one of the things that I think can be really powerful. So when I have someone come in, I will get them hooked up to like multiple parts of the autonomic nervous system. So skin conductance, temperature, heart rate, respiration, CO2 levels, some EMG for muscle tension. We get a baseline, kind of what's going on. We walk through some minor mental stressors with some recoveries. And I get a really good picture of how is someone responding to stress? How is their body recovering? Just kind of at baseline, sitting quietly. How are they functioning and running? But I can't even tell you how many times, like I sit down with someone and go over their results and they're like, oh, that makes a lot of sense why I feel this way in certain situations. Or, oh, I'm having chronic headaches because look at that. My tension went up and then it didn't release during the recovery. So just over time, by the end, I'm holding so much tension. Maybe that's how I look throughout the day at work or at home. And so that insight alone, I think, can be so powerful for people to see. And to what you said before, like when you can see evidence like that, it's hard to say, oh, it doesn't really matter, you know?
Yeah. Because some people, it seems like they're more naturally in tune with their bodies, and some people seem very body blind.
Yeah. So, I definitely see both there.
Yeah. So some people who they see like a biofeedback result, for example, and they go, yeah, that makes sense. They basically could have told you that without seeing it on the machine, but it validates it. And some people who see it and go, I never would have known what was going on. Yeah. That's really hard because, I mean, I don't know how available this kind of work is across the country because it's not everywhere yet, right? I pulled up YouTube and stuff like that, and there was like a hospital in Oregon or something that was doing it. There was certain places, but it's not like everywhere. But I do find that even some of that breath work, doing some of these things, it starts to teach you, the baby step towards a little bit more body awareness of what's going on in your system.
Yeah, well, after we have awareness, then it's like, what are we going to do with it, right? So a lot of what we'll do, depending on what's going on for each person, but practicing like some specific breathing techniques that are good at raising heart rate variability, literally, if practiced over time, shift the baseline functioning of the nervous system. So when people start to do that regularly, like, oh, I literally feel different in my body and my emotions. And I still get so like excited when that happens, when, when they first come in and it's just like, whoosh, you can feel energy of people, right? And then over time, it comes down and you can see the regulation. But we do like breath, downgrading with muscles, if they can learn how to release throughout the day, what that feels like in the body.
What do you mean downgrading muscles? What does that mean?
Like if I put the EMG sensors on the traps, let's say the top of the shoulders here, and they see they're really holding up here. When they can see on the screen, okay, it's up at this level. If I do this, it comes down.
Like drop my shoulders.
If I imagine, a lot of times I use imagery because that can be so powerful. Imagine like butter melting and just coming and releasing. So they'll do that and they'll see the tension come down. Then they have that felt sense in the body of what that's like, so they can carry that into their daily life. Now they're able to recognize, okay, this is what the tension feels like. This is what I can do to release and let go. That's a powerful tool for what you're talking about with people who haven't necessarily been in tune with that. Because once you see it and engage it in real time, it becomes more of a felt sense.
Yeah, even that feeling. Like I can think of certain times where I've had that feeling of the body going relaxed and going, oh, you mean I can do this on purpose?
Yeah.
That is, I think, that's a game changer for me.
Yeah.
Like just had it this morning. I woke up this morning and I was like, I don't think jiu-jitsu is the right call for today. So I'm going to ride my bike around for a while. I'm going to go into this. And then just being in tune with like my breath through the whole morning. And I was like, oh, I chose well because I didn't feel good when I woke up. I had a headache and all this stuff. And using that whole process of like breathing in the sunlight and doing this like calmed the system down, because there was definitely a time, and I think this is a very normal thing in our culture, where it's like, I have a headache, grab an Advil, right? I'm tired, grab some caffeine. I'm anxious, grab a drink, right? These are the natural responses. And this is like this body awareness and this kind of work is kind of like actually giving solutions to this and not just medicating the problem.
Yeah, getting to the root. Yeah.
Right. Because I think that we are fighting the pill culture in a way. So what would you say to that whole?
There's always a delicate balance for me.
Yeah. That's why I'm asking, because I want the delicate balance.
Yeah. I'm not against medications. Sure. I mean, there is a lot.
Sure.
I mean, my dad had a liver transplant and he is alive today because of the medical system and where it's at. So
and biked across the country.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. He's fully recovered and doing so well. So I'm not against it, but I'm also very pro let's get to the root. Right. So are things we can do that optimize nervous system functioning? Are there things that on a cognitive level that are impacting the body that maybe if we work with that, things will shift? They're all interconnected. Yeah. And as we go along and we do those things, if things are still there or whatever, we can incorporate. But it doesn't have to be an either or. It can be a both and.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you notice that depending upon people's preferred reactions to fight, flight, freeze, there's others like fawn and so forth, but that also affects how their feedback, their biofeedback, what comes through that? Or is it pretty consistent in terms of, muscular tightness, sweating, heart rate, that sort of thing?
Everyone responds a little bit differently. That's why we look at a bunch of different things, like skin conductance is the activation of the sweat glands. Mm-hmm. So the higher that number goes, the more activation. Mm-hmm. But some people, their baseline is higher than others. Some get really activated with that one where some others don't, versus heart rate or temperature, things like that. So it's also a good tool to kind of see, how does your body respond overall? Mm-hmm. And maybe why are we experiencing the symptoms that we are?
Because I know that some people will freeze in a situation, and it's almost like a preparation for death. Yeah. And I don't know if it was Peter Levine or someone else who was describing this, but animals, when they're about to die, if they've been caught by, say, a deer's been caught by a tiger or lion or something like that, that there's a preparation for that in which the body just sort of shuts down. And so in that situation, is it more of a slowing down of those functions? And have you seen that where you're like, boy, this person's constantly in that space of freezing, this is the end, sort of thing. Even if their head's not thinking that, their body's acting that way.
Yeah. One of the things that I heard that it was really powerful to me, I get a lot of trauma, like childhood trauma, sexual trauma, things like that. And there's a lot of self-blame. Why didn't I do something? Why didn't I fight? Why didn't I run?
Right. Yes.
And it's amazing to me how our brains and bodies work, but with the fight, with the flight, with the freezing, it has to determine what is going to save my life in this moment. Mm-hmm. Right. So maybe running is what's going to save my life, but maybe just freezing and not moving is what's actually just going to keep me alive. Mm-hmm. And so if we're able to work through, okay, it's not your fault. There's nothing wrong with you. You didn't make the wrong decision. Your brain and body just decided right in that moment, freezing and just getting through was the best option for your survival.
That kind of honors the response to...
Yeah. Mm.
Which is what I think people need to hear sometimes, because it's, why didn't I? Why didn't I?
Exactly.
And, yeah, but your body did what it needed to do, and it saved you, and it protected you, So I feel that. I feel that honoring of that. And what are some techniques you give to people, who just okay, I've heard this podcast. I think this is so good, and I would like to learn something. I would like to start practicing some things, right now. And we talk a lot about breathing. That's one of the ways to do that. And maybe there's more that you could suggest in that space. What are some other responses? If we're going to be responsible for our reactions in this world and not leave it to the context has to change. I need drugs. I need this. I need that. Yeah. So in what ways can I take responsibility for what's happening in my life? Not blame, like you're saying, but responsibility to deal with some of these issues besides seeing someone like you.
Yeah. Like I said earlier, I think the holistic picture is so important. And like you talked about right in the beginning, everything that we experience shapes us, how we see the world, how our body responds. And so I think creating space, whether that's therapy, whether it's journaling, whether it's exercise, whatever it is, creating space to begin to really look at, how have my experience shaped me? How do I see this world? How am I perceiving things? And how is my body responding out of that? With biofeedback and all the body stuff, if we only address that, but don't address maybe the cognitions that have been built in from things that we experience, that's going to continue to have a negative impact. the things that can activate that stress response, the dog running towards me, or I have an anxious thought about something. Mm-hmm. My body responds in the same way. Mm-hmm. It's unsafe, whether physically, emotionally, it feels unsafe.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so if we just kind of create some space to be able to see what's really going on here, mm-hmm. then it's empowering to be able to know what I can do with this and what that looks like.
I love that. And some of the things that I think in that space are helpful for folks is to remember that part of the stages is, of course, we're going to look to the threats that are external to us. Mm-hmm. And we're going to see the threats as that's the problem.
Yeah.
And stop there. So what we want to do is invite people into, but what was my response to that?
Yeah.
At the time, I did the best that I could.
Yeah.
And so I don't blame myself, but in order to take responsibility, how can I see this now differently? And how can I respond differently?
Yeah.
Because I can. And one of my teachers at the Enneagram, she did a lot of this sort of work. And she would say, in this present moment right now, everything is okay.
Yeah.
Right? But your mind is caught in the past where the trauma took place or in the anxiety of what could take place in the future in this moment right now. So I love that idea of the space right now in this moment.
I use a lot of mindfulness. You think of, let's say a kid grows up in a home where they have an angry drunk as a father, let's say, and they get home from school, just their mom's there, they're okay. But every time they hear that front door open at 5 or 6, they know what's coming. Their stress response turns on. They start to become more hypervigilant. That pattern gets learned over time, right? Mm-hmm. So that becomes built in. That could begin to be applied to male figures in general, certain personality types. Yeah. It can be hooked to the door, the click of the door opening.
Absolutely.
And so, like we were talking about, the amygdala remembers everything through our senses. And so all of a sudden, triggers are everywhere in your environment and you don't even realize it, right?
Yeah. And they can come through all the senses. So there's you just gave an auditory one of a certain kind of a sound, and certain doors have different sounds. So there's the trigger of a sound. There can be the trigger of a smell. You go, oh, this suddenly smells like this, and I got taken back there. So it can be a smell, it can be a sight, like someone comes around the corner in a certain way, and just like the movement of their body can impact us. And so I think we notice sometimes that we're having this experience, we're having this like, oh no, but we don't necessarily know why. And so when you're talking about this, creating this space, and I love what you said, and I want to bring it back around where you're talking about, this is why you work to heal the self, because then the healed self can determine whether the context needs to change. Yeah. Like that is so wise. And I would just want to enhance that, because we don't know why we're being impacted by something. And then all of a sudden we just become this default reactions to everything. Yeah. And this is the thing that you're saying, if this is a major quality of life change.
Yeah.
This is perhaps the biggest, to my mind, the biggest lesson for, even in what we're talking about here, for me, that's the biggest right here, because we are so blind otherwise. We're kind of making our way through the world thinking that it's my environment, it's the problem of the people around me, or it's me.
Yeah. Depending on their type, some people really externalize the problem. Oh, it's this. I have to get rid of this and get rid of this in my life. I have to move. I have to change this external thing. And they don't actually deal with the person who can make those decisions better, or it doesn't matter and it's all my fault. Yeah. I'm the one to blame in every situation, and I just have to figure out how to adapt. I just have to get better at dealing with this person at my work. Well, heal the self and you actually know whether you should even stay in that job. Yeah. Right. So regardless of where you are on that spectrum, do you tend to externalize and you need to wake up to the common thread here is me? Or is it do you blame yourself for everything? Yeah. And you have to go, you know what? This is not reality. To me, any explanation that completely negates one or the other is not a holistic explanation of the problem.
Yeah.
And I think the major takeaway that I would want people to really get under their skin is you start with you create that space, you start to experience some healing, you start to center and get back to a good place. And then you can actually become a better
evaluator of your surroundings and what's impacting you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With the example we were just talking about, the hearing the door click, and that's a trigger. In that moment, the brain and body is responding out of the past. Like you were saying, it's not responding out of the now. And so that space, if we can create that, and I kind of joke with my clients, like, talk to yourself in that self-compassion way of like, I get it. You're trying to protect me right now. Yeah. I see it. That pattern, I needed that pattern before.
Yeah.
But I don't need it right now.
Yeah.
I'm here right now. I'm safe. I'm okay. What you talked about before, like grounding skills are really powerful for that, bringing the body back from the past or the future to right now.
And they're different. There are different ones. And I think for different people, right?
Yeah.
Like some people like I remember laying down with my type 6 son, who's very anxious and seems to be born that way. And so I was laying next to him, and I knew about tapping. So, I just started tapping him a little bit.
Yeah.
And then I'd sometimes rub his back and stuff. I said, which one do you prefer? And he was like, tapping. He was like instantaneously knew. He's like, that feels good. It's like, is that calming to you? Yes. It's like so interesting because tapping doesn't work for me at all, except for when I'm tapping the table or doing this. I realized I was always doing this ever since I was a kid. I became a drummer, and it was always that thing that felt and even when I played drums, I would find myself hitting a point of like real zen, like total locked in the space and the moment of no sense of time, except for the very calming feeling of that locked in rhythm. Yeah. And so that's always been true for me. And I realized it took me a while to realize that's what I'm doing, right? Automatically just kind of doing this to kind of bring my system down. So anyways, back to that question of like, are there are probably different techniques?
Yeah.
Or different
I have
types.
People play with a bunch of different ones to see what is most effective for them. Essentially what you're doing, like we were talking about before, the amygdala remembers everything through the senses. So we're activating the senses in the here and now. So for some people, that felt sense, can be really important. Just like even just all of a sudden having a rock in your hand or a pencil, whatever it is, and just noting, is it cool? Is it sharp? Is it, whatever?
Yeah.
A 5 senses check-in can be really good. Just in a moment, what do I see? What do I hear? What do I taste? What do I smell? What's my felt sense in the body? I mean, we can literally do that in 20 seconds.
Yeah.
And it draws us back to the here and now.
And you can do that anywhere, at any time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can name the colors in the room if that's better for, like all of a sudden everything that's green, or just start naming things, just grounding yourself in the presence. It's just, there's
I had
so many different ways.
someone bouncing up and down in front of me at one of the workshops. And so what are you doing? And she's like, I'm grounding myself. Literally, she was like, that helps me because I feel like my anxiety's just taken off. So I'm just jumping up and down, and it helps me to get back into the body. So it is fascinating how many techniques, and I love the idea that you're suggesting, play with the different ones, experiment and try, because you'll find something that will be more helpful to you to get yourself again back into the here and now. And for people that tend to lose themselves in the sort of like imaginative or the headspace or the anxiety, like coming back to that groundedness of the body, of being right here in this moment. Yeah.
And what is so powerful too is that the more we're doing these things, we're literally shifting how the body responds moving forward. Right? So it's not just for that moment. If we go to the gym and we're regularly lifting weights, we're changing our muscle. It grows stronger. It gets bigger. Our baseline shifts. The same thing happens every time I hear that door click, but I take a moment to pause. I regulate my nervous system. Maybe I ground myself in the present moment. I'm starting to weaken that neural connection that's been so ingrained for so long that moving forward, maybe that's less intense. Maybe I'm creating a new neural connection. And that's why I love what I do. It's not just for the moment.
I bet you do,
it's
because you're seeing growth. Yeah. So it'd be like someone at a baseline could be, say, on a scale of 1 to 10, anxiety being somewhere between a 7 and an 8 on the regular. You're saying that baseline could shift through doing some of these practices to where it's more like a 5 to a 6 or something like that, or maybe a 4 to a 5 range.
Yeah.
And you've seen that happen in the work
absolutely.
you've done.
If we get to the root of what's going on and address it from all the different angles, man, it's so empowering.
Yeah, because it does. It gives us our lives back, you know. And and I think there's so many different people that I've talked to. They're like, "Oh, when I did this, it gave me my life back." I even talk about like all of this work, you know, within the Enneagram. Like the biggest thing that it's given me back is it shortens the amount of time that I'm disrupted. Like, yes, I still notice those triggers. Yes, those things are still present.
Yeah.
But something that used to knock me out for a week or several days, I move through in a matter of like minutes or hours. It's just kind of like I can come back down. I can return to the self. Like it empowers you to return to yourself. I'm no longer like a subject of the environment. And I think that's one of those things that there's these little things, they sound so silly. Like notice the colors in the room. It sounds so absurd. Well, but it's not if it gives you your freaking life back.
Yeah.
You know, to tune into your 5 senses and actually notice which one is being impacted right now. It's just going like, okay. You know, because for some people, like I'm tasting this, but why am I like this taste makes me feel safer, right? Because for people who have things with food, and it has it's all about protection and safety. You know, we talk about personality as a survival strategy. Like we adapted these things as complex survival strategies, but the whole point of doing work is to soften some of that, to not need as many like this constant like hypervigilance or reactivity. And I love this because you're just talking about like changing at a fundamental level, like our reactivity.
Yeah.
So back to the responsibility idea there. I think, you know, to me, it strikes me. And you said, Jim, I felt like you got my life back.
Yeah.
I think for a lot of people, their starting point is to believe that the way they get their lives back has to do with like, no, just change the problem. And then I won't have that reaction anymore. Right. Like, that's stupid. Look at the colors in the room. No, fire the damn boss because he's the problem or she's the problem. You know, it's like, and so we're thinking constantly like that. And we actually think that that is a measure of responsibility or ownership, a sense of autonomy or control.
Yeah.
And what we're suggesting here, I think, is not that you shouldn't have autonomy or control, but the way you're going about it is actually trying to control your environment more so than also looking at the balance of that, which is, what is my response to that? Yeah. And the remarkable thing is the sense of autonomy and the sense of power and the sense of control that we experience when we do start to heal from the inside and have different responses. Have you noticed that as well, or how would you put that?
Well, example I give a lot is, I'm assuming neither one of you have ever been caught in quicksand, right?
No, sure.
But what they say is, you know, you're walking on quicksand is basically just sand with a higher amount of water in it, right? So if you're walking along, your foot starts to sink into quicksand. What is our natural tendency?
Move
fight
faster,
it, right? Yeah. Like I gotta get my leg out. I gotta protect myself, get myself seat. So I'm gonna fight it. What they actually say to do is to start to sit down, then lay down so that you're floating on top of it. Your foot will naturally start to come up, and then you just kind of move yourself to safety, right? And that's such a good picture of when I'm facing something, is fighting it really the best option right here? Or maybe I just need to sit down in it and be with it, you know, have some discomfort for a bit, and then slowly move myself through it.
Yeah.
And when you were talking about what you said, you've created that space to just be with it, acknowledge it for what it is, but downgrade it. I can get through this and then move on.
Yeah. Like the power of sitting with discomfort. Like I often talk about like when I started doing cold immersion, it did start to affect emotional stuff because I started to learn the difference between discomfort and danger. Like it somehow taught my system that in a way that I wouldn't have been able to expect. But then the more I did, you know, if you're in your shower and you just flip it all the way to cold, your immediate response is, oh my God, I have to die. I have to change this. I have to change it immediately.
Exactly.
But like 10 seconds of breathing and you're kind of like, oh, I'm okay.
Yeah.
But it's like a training. And so I'm like, oh, I can probably change this in a lot of other ways.
The idea of sitting in it and rather than fighting it. I remember one of my teachers years ago said, you can sit in it, but you don't want to become overcome by it. It's not like you're completely identified by it. So let's learn to develop the observer inside you, the ability to see the different parts of you. That right now you have fear, but you are not overcome by the fear. You have sadness, you have pain, you have this. And in that way, you're starting to kind of create this distance between you and that thing. So it's not like you're exiling it or denying it or you're overcome by it because you're in it and over-identified with it. It's sort of like a sitting within that space, looking at it, and then you start to realize you're okay because you're the observer is not over-identified with any one of those things.
Yeah. And here's my caveat for therapy. If there is significant trauma, that's very hard to do on your own. So being able to go to something, sit with it while staying regulated and not re-traumatizing yourself can be really important.
That's a very, very good point. Yeah. Excellent.
I think a lot of these things we're talking about can be done outside of therapy, but I just wanted to give that caveat.
No, that's a very,
one.
very important piece.
Yeah.
And again, we're talking about stages of healing. Like, if you're in that space, then external help is enormous. And so, thank you for saying that.
Yeah, because I think there is an aspect of this that's really important, which is there's so many things that we can heal with people we know, with friends in context of good community. And there's certain times where like you need someone who really understands what they're talking about, like a trained professional in this world to be like, that knows how to create safe space so that you aren't re-traumatized. So I think a lot of times, a lot of what we're talking about is like the normal things that we've all experienced that we need to go through healing. But we're talking about like high level trauma, stuff like that. Like, yes, put yourself with someone who knows how to take you through something that's not going to re-traumatize you. But I really do think, and I would love your thoughts on this, but it seems like people with really high trauma, like just talking, like talk therapy is not really enough.
Yeah. Trauma impacts us at every level, right?
Yes, right.
So we have to address every level. But one of the interesting things that they found in studies is if someone begins to talk about a past trauma and they're becoming triggered, one of the parts of the brain called Broca's area that's responsible for being able to verbalize things. It's the thing that goes offline when someone has a stroke and they're not able to communicate.
Okay.
What they've seen is that area becomes deactivated. And so literally in a moment, people cannot verbalize what they're feeling, what's going on. They're just experiencing it at a body level. And that's why I think it's just so critical to address every level because sometimes it's just not able to be verbalized. It's not able to be done here. Us being able to verbalize something is prefrontal cortex, right?
Right.
Yeah. So a lot of the trauma is stored way underneath that. And so we have to get to that part and what's going on there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when I read Body Keeps the Score and they were talking about the certain times when someone would be like in a yoga class, they would get in a certain position. All of a sudden it would unlock some kind of memory or something. They'd just start like weeping. That happened to a friend of mine. She was in a boxing class and unleashed a few punches and all of a sudden all this emotion, this stored emotion started coming out and it kind of caught by surprise. This actually happened to me in jiu-jitsu once. I just like suddenly lost it emotionally. And it's just like the body it's looking for ways to kind of let some of this stuff, out that like I can't name what that was. Yeah. And I think, who knows? That's part of the journey is like trying to discover some of this stuff.
Yeah, like a lot of sessions, depending on what we're focusing on, there's not too much talking going on. We're tracking what's going on in the body. If someone's talking about an assault or something like that, and all of a sudden their arm starts to feel tense, like we notice, okay, what's going on in the body? Maybe there's a movement that needs to happen as an act of defense that they didn't get to do, that was blunted in the moment. Wow. And just releasing that out of the arm and making that movement is so freeing. That's now released. Then that has an impact on how I feel, how I think, all the way up.
Wow.
Yeah. Understanding is last, it seems, in many regards. Like it's You may not understand it, but do this. I do think that sometimes trying to understand something and trying to make sense of it can actually hamper the process of getting through. Now, this is something you have to release in the body. Yeah. This is something you have to allow the emotions to do what they want to do. And don't try to understand it at this moment. Just be present to it. And then the brain catches up later and goes, oh, wow. But the funny thing about it is that all the crazy thinking gets quiet in moments like that.
I love that. I had somebody say that to me years ago. They said, in our Western world, we want to understand first and do second. But he said, but transformation is do first and understand second. Mm-hmm. And I think what you're talking about is you're talking about an experience.
Yeah.
It's experience before it is understanding.
Yeah.
So so much of your work is trying to give people an experience of themselves first.
Yeah, for sure.
I love that.
So if people want to go through like
the biofeedback,
people are interested in this now. Where would they go? Would they fly up to Boston and see?
I mean, it is probably in the past decade, so much more research has been done. And I think even in the next decade, it's going to skyrocket because we're beginning to see like this is interconnected, people. But I think you mentioned the body keeps the score. I mean, that's like one of the Bibles of this, if you start to look at and read through that and start seeing for yourself what's going on here, creating some of that space, then that might lead you and guide you to maybe yoga would be beneficial for me. Maybe it is therapy and doing some trauma. I don't know, whatever it is, but
you're creating space in all of those things you just mentioned. You're giving yourself space to actually even process something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe you can't get like the kind of thing you're talking about for everyone right now, but some of them can.
Yeah.
And for others, like you can start to make space. I think you've given tools today that tells people like, hey, if you're having that trauma response when you hear that door click, like come back into the moment, come into the five senses. Like there are things you can do in the immediate to become more body aware and to tune into those things. I think all of those things is a gift. All those things that you shared is a total gift because this is what all of us need to do as we're trying to become holistic. Like we have to tune into this. Yeah. Like we aren't divorced from that. You even mentioned diet. Like I do that with clients sometimes. What is food that makes you feel great? Mm-hmm. All these little things are game changers. Like these are not small things. Yeah. They all impact our sense of well-being. And the person with a better sense of well-being can make better choices about all the other things you're concerned with.
Yeah.
Like we worry about all of these other things, but I would just come back to remembering that thing, like work on the healing, and the healed person makes better choices. The healed person is more trustworthy. The healed person can accomplish what you feel like you can't at this point in time. Yeah. And that is beautiful.
So thank you so much for listening. Make sure you are subscribed. And if you leave us a review on iTunes, it really helps the algorithm that helps people find the show. You can follow us on Instagram at just Art of Growth. And like I said at the beginning, you can get to all of our work at theartofgrowth.org. But for now, my friends, peace to your body. May a fresh breath fill your lungs with new hope and new vision, with comfort and rest, with peace and perspective. And may your body open the door for your heart to thrive, for your mind to be clear, as you move more toward the whole person you have a vision of. Grace and growth, my friends.